So I did something crazy. I got my hands on a unique, never-before-seen dating app dataset featuring over 3,700 Tinder users swiping data. And guess what? We're gonna be tearing it apart. But we're not stopping there. We're gonna dig into the loneliness epidemic, the incel community, men versus women dating app surveys, the illusion of choice, sketchy blog posts, and so much more. We've been told dating apps are here to help us connect, to make finding love easier, more efficient. But what if I told you that's all wrong? For the first time, with real data from real people, we can cut through the smoke and mirrors and finally see the truth. And once you do, you might never look at dating apps the same again. I'm so excited and nervous to share this with you all. I'm literally shaking, so let's dive in. So if you haven't been paying attention, people are lonely, like historically lonely. The WHO recently announced that loneliness is a public health concern. In 2023, the US Surgeon General released a report comparing loneliness to, no joke, smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And some countries are even passing legislation, yes, legislation, to help fight what many are calling the loneliness epidemic. Yeah, it's that bad. And while there are many reasons why loneliness is becoming a large threat, social media, the removal of third places, remote work, economic stress, one of the biggest factors, dating. Or rather, the struggle to date in the year of our Lord, 2025. Here's a terrifying fun fact. In 2020, over 50% of relationships started online. And by 2024, that number climbed to 60%. And now if you're single, online dating isn't just an option, it's the default. Most couples meet through dating apps. But here's the thing. Dating apps suck. If we made a list of things that people really hate, number one could be slow Wi-Fi, number two could be Mondays, and honestly, you could make a strong case for number three being dating apps. They blow. And there are plenty of reasons why these apps famously blow. The algorithms are designed to keep you swiping forever. You're forced to judge people based on just a few pictures. And honestly, the whole experience feels kind of cringe. Plus, from a business side, most apps are owned by the same company. And as I've detailed previously on my channel, these apps are pay to win, resulting in a pretty crappy experience. And that's where things get messy. People get frustrated. People start looking for explanations. Why does online dating feel impossible? Why have I had no luck? Is it me? Is it them? Is it the app? Maybe you're wondering the same things, and that's why you're watching me talk about this in the middle of nowhere. Whatever the case is, people are not well, the kids are not all right. And on top of this, the internet has done its little fun thing it always likes to do and made the situation worse.
Hey, I'm Jesse, and I'm all about getting you older guys that younger, beautiful girlfriend. I'm gonna show you exactly the secret of how to make that female friend of yours suddenly feel horny.
If y'all really wanna be on some steroid shit,
make her suddenly feel turned on.
You have multiple Tinder profiles, multiple Bumble profiles.
Make her suddenly feel wet.
You can do this with different phone numbers and different emails.
And this is especially good when there's a big age gap there.
What the hell are we gonna do without men?
Men are the employers, women are the employees.
You see all these buildings go up, these men, they're doing impossible things.
Don't walk around with a sword. That's what they want you to do. Don't you understand?
Working on the sewers, they're up on the power lines.
This is an act of rebellion.
In the storms, in the rain.
All girls are gold diggers, some are just better at hiding the shovel.
The man who works in Starbucks, who's sad all the time, you won't reply to him. Neither will any other female.
These dating apps, all they do is train women to become these entitled sociopaths.
What is the biggest turnoff?
Guys under 6 foot.
5 red flags in men you should never ignore.
If he likes cats, it's because an ex-girlfriend had one and then he realized they're cute, they're cuddly, they're cool. Red flag.
Females don't have independent thought. They're just empty vessels.
Heavily tattooed women and piercing. They're to be avoided.
A woman's value is directly tied to can you land a man of higher value.
There is not a female on the planet who's invisible today. You can be a 4, overweight, fat.
The people who are judging a book by the cover, those people have vaginas.
Men, in my experience, want debt-free, tattoo-free virgins.
They'll be a 5 thinking they deserve a 9.
I can't believe I've just heard.
Realistically, it's mostly guys, doing the tattoo work on their bodies, right? And I know several tattoo artists, and the vast majority of them have intimate experiences with these women too at the same time.
Wow, never thought about that.
Over the years, the online discourse around men, women, loneliness, and modern dating has gotten insane. In fact, I was unsure of even creating this video because of how controversial this topic is. Everywhere you look online, someone's out there making wild, sweeping claims about all men or all women. For example, one of the most persistent and wild narratives in all of this comes from the Blackpill/Incel communities. Many members believe that women nowadays are being too selective, and that they're the reason behind the loneliness epidemic, and why men aren't having success on dating apps. This kind of thinking can quickly spiral into full-blown misogyny, and there's really no definitive science to back up these claims. In fact, there's plenty of science arguing otherwise. I bring all of this up because these influencers and people who believe in these wild narratives often use dating app data to reinforce their beliefs.
We live in a time where women have never had as much choice. Look at the data sets. You can look it up on OkCupid.
And this doesn't account for, the Plenty of Fish data, the Tinder data that we have.
They estimated men are spending like 85 minutes and women are spending 90 minutes a day on online dating. Of course, women are pursuing that for validation and ego feeding.
I even saw this happen in real time in the comment section of my last video. People taking my own data and my experience and using it to shift the blame on women, which is ridiculous because the whole reason I created that video wasn't to focus on modern women, but to expose the questionable business practices of companies profiting off lonely people, predominantly lonely men. The irony is, many of these influencers and self-proclaimed gurus who get millions of views spreading these ideas, they're the same ones selling books or expensive courses profiting off, you guessed it, lonely men. Like, how do some people not see the irony here? So with this wild online discourse, I think it's important to look at the data, analyze it, and explore theories and help explain what's actually going on here. In fact, I'd argue it's more important than ever. Some of the data that people use to discern these opinions is, how should I put it? Shit. For example, one of the most frequently cited sources in this discussion is an infamous 2009 OkCupid dating app blog post, which some claim proved women's hypergamy. This post, I'm not kidding, has become a pillar of incel ideology. However, many argue takeaways from this post are grossly taken out of context, and the article does not prove anything. The even crazier part about all of this is that that blog post was removed, fueling the controversy. Either way, a 2009 deleted blog post isn't a reliable data point. I mean, seriously, this was 3 years before Tinder and Hinge even launched. The modern dating landscape is completely different now. Any takeaway from that post should be considered void. Now, you would think that 15 years later, the unreliable data trend would end, but unfortunately, it's even worse. Right now, if you Google the average match rate for men or women on Tinder, the top result is an article titled "Key Tinder Statistics You Need to Know," written by Steven Zander. Let's just call him Steven. Now, stick with me, I'm about to blow your mind. At first glance, this post looks credible. Steven is the CEO of Cross River Therapy and has over a decade of experience in the healthcare industry. Seems legit, right? The page itself contains some interesting takeaways, but once you start digging into these sources, things get a little fuzzy. At one point, Steven cites a Quora post. Yes, a Quora post. You know, the website where literally anyone can chime in with their opinion. And then one of the most credible data points in the article, a survey of just over 600 people. Now, that's something, better than nothing, to be clear, but it's hardly what I'd call definitive data. And if I had to guess, Steven probably didn't even write this article.
I'm gonna show you today how I grew Cross River Therapy's organic traffic from 300 organic monthly visitors to over 40,000. in just 7 months.
A guy named Josh runs a YouTube channel where he talks about optimizing this very website for SEO, and he's done a solid job. He even set up a script to update the date on this post, along with all other statistics pages on the website to make it look fresh, when in reality, it's not. To be clear, I'm not trying to dunk on Steven or Josh. These are common SEO tricks. You'd be surprised how often this occurs. The only reason I'm aware of this is because of my background in SEO. Their business from the outside actually seems solid. They help children with autism, which is amazing. So please do not take this in a malicious way. That said, why would Josh think an article about Tinder statistics belongs on a website focused on helping children with autism? Well, your guess is as good as mine. But I bring all this up to make a point. There isn't much reliable data out there on dating apps. But why? Well, one of the main reasons public data about these apps is extremely limited is because getting the data is complex. Complex, but not impossible. Thanks to data privacy laws, anyone can request their own user data from these apps. However, the data doesn't really come in a digestible format. Many believe this isn't a coincidence. The theory is that these companies don't want you dwelling on how much time you actually spend on these apps, how low your success rate actually is, or just how stacked the odds are actually against you. Not because of some grand conspiracy to protect feminism or alpha men or whatever it might be, but simply to protect their bottom line. And there may be some truth to that. When these companies do share statistics, they're clearly curated. Take OkCupid, for example. They used to publicly share some pretty wild dating app stats until they were acquired by Match Group in 2011. One of their most famous blog posts was titled, "I'm not kidding, why you should never pay for online dating." The article was written by former OkCupid co-founder Christian Rudder and received national attention. That post is no longer public and only accessible through internet archives. In fact, the entire original blog has since been taken down. Now, it's worth noting Rudder claimed in a 2014 Time article Match had nothing to do with the pausing of his articles, but he left the position in 2015, and in 2018 the blog relaunched with all of his articles gone. So who really knows? But I think it's safe to say today, Match would never release data that suggests you shouldn't pay for dating apps. Instead, they carefully curate the narrative, releasing studies on trends like post-pandemic dating, while conveniently ignoring the data that actually matters. They have access to the numbers. They know the real match rates, whether super likes actually work, but none of that is public, because if people saw how inefficient the system truly is, they'd start questioning why they're paying for it in the first place. And when users voice their frustration, Tinder/Match's response isn't transparency or meaningful change, it's blame the users or let's add more tech. AI-powered matching. Yeah, I'm not kidding. It was announced last month Tinder is releasing new AI-powered features for discovery and matching. Because at the end of the day, they're not trying to help people find love, they're trying to keep them swiping. Point is, because these companies, or should I say company, aren't really the most reliable when it comes to sharing user data or even having our best interests in mind, if we want to accurately understand why these apps feel so broken, we're left with two main methods. One, independent surveys, and two, analyzing individual user data and then combining that user data into a massive set. That, believe it or not, is possible. However, it requires a lot of legwork, which, don't worry, I've done. But let's start with the easy one, surveys. In 2023, a survey of a little over 60,000 people found that 67% of online dating service users in the US were men, while only 33% were women. And while this is just one survey, it's a pretty large sample size compared to what else is out there. And it actually tells us a lot. For a long time, the general consensus around dating apps was it's a bit of a sausage fest, and this pretty much confirms that. Now, you might think this is a kind of minor thing, but this is actually a huge data point because it explains a lot. Simply, more men are competing for fewer women, creating a supply and demand imbalance. Let's imagine this play out in real time. Say you're a man and you walk into a bar with 100 people, yourself included. And let's just say in this scenario that everyone is straight. If dating app gender ratios applied, that would leave us with 33 women and 67 men. What's crazy about all this is if every single woman paired up with another man, that would still leave 34 men without a match. But where it gets even crazier, let's talk about preferences, right? So let's say out of these 33 women, maybe only 28 want a long-term relationship, and you really want a long-term relationship. Let's say that you're a big pet person and you have a dog or a cat. All right, well, we might have to cut that in half. Pets are a big thing for a lot of people, and some people just can't do them. And then let's say that maybe you want to be with somebody who really likes the same music as you. Well, look at that. We got to cut that in half again. And soon you're left with a far smaller pool of options in this scenario. And then of course we can't forget that these are your preferences. Somebody might check all these boxes for you, but they might also have another box for themselves that you might not check. Point is, the pool shrinks exponentially once you start to add in real life preferences or real life layers to compatibility. Now think about how this plays out on dating apps. Here, first impressions aren't just quick, they're instant. You're expected to sum up your entire personality in a handful of photos and a bio so short it barely qualifies as an elevator pitch. There's no room for nuance, no space for context, just a split-second decision based on a handful of curated details. So what happens? People adjust. They figure out the meta or what gets attention and start presenting themselves the same way. That's why many dating profiles look similar, because users aren't optimizing for meaningful connection, they're optimizing for engagement. This also creates an entirely different challenge for women, because while statistically women may have numerically more options, there is such thing as too many options. Let me introduce you to option paralysis. Option paralysis is the phenomenon of being overwhelmed by too many choices. The term is most associated with psychologist Barry Schwartz, who coined the term in 2004 in his hit book, The Paradox of Choice. Barry argued that when people are presented with too many options, decisions become harder to make. When I think about this, I think about video games. Hear me out. Between my Steam and Xbox library plus my Game Pass membership, I have access to hundreds of games, and yet I often spend more time scrolling through my catalog than actually playing anything. If you're not a gamer, you've probably experienced the same thing with a streaming service like Netflix or HBO Max. When you're presented with too many options, making a choice feels almost impossible. This phenomenon directly applies to what many women are dealing with on dating apps. If someone logs into an app and sees 50 or let's say 100 likes, they may feel overwhelmed. They might not want to sort through all those options. To make matters worse, sorting through those potentially 100 options costs money, and in the end, many of these people may end up not choosing anyone at all. Of course, option paralysis on dating apps isn't exclusive to women, but statistically, they're more likely to experience it. With only 33% of app users being women, they're exposed to far more matches than men. It's just basic math. But what else can we learn from these surveys? The Pew Research Center has conducted several studies on online dating over the years, revealing key insights like why people turn to dating apps, how safe they perceive them to be, and more. One of the most interesting takeaways I found was from a 2020 study of 6,000 US adults. The study found that a majority of women under 50 who have used dating apps, at 56%, reported receiving unsolicited explicit messages or images. About 43% had someone persistently contact them after they said they weren't interested, and most concerning, 11% had received threats of physical harm. These experiences were significantly less common among women over 50 and men of any age. The same study found that 52% of dating app users, both men and women, reported encountering someone they believed was trying to scam them. Despite these findings, along with many others, the study couldn't determine whether users' overall experiences on these platforms were more positive or negative. And while Pew Research and similar surveys provide us with a lot of really interesting takeaways, specific user app data is extremely limited. Don't get me wrong, analyzing a 60,000 person survey, looking at Pew Research, supply and demand imbalances, that's all a very great foundation and a good start. But I want more. We're like at the surface level or lithosphere. I want to be at the upper mantle. Heck, I want to be in the inner core. So let's journey to the center of the earth together. I have to come clean about something. I am not perfect. I snore a little. Sometimes I care too much. Occasionally I take a little bit too many napkins from fast food restaurants. And I'm not an expert in data science. In fact, college statistics was, let's just say challenging. But what I lack in some areas, I make up for in others. I am a people person. I have great friends. I've made great connections throughout my life. When I posted my first video on dating apps, a lot of amazing people reached out about a follow-up. One of them was Christian, the creator of a website called Swipe Stats. To clarify, this isn't a sponsorship. I'm not affiliated with the website, just really important context. Remember when I said public data on dating apps is extremely limited? That's because getting the data is complicated, and the platforms don't provide it in an easily digestible format. Websites like Swipe Stats help with that by analyzing individual user data, showing match rates, message totals, and more. I actually used the site for the Tinder section in my last video. Christian saw this and reached out and told me he has more than 3,700 anonymized profiles on his site with records going back as far as 2014 that I could get access to, which is, as of recording this, the largest collective Tinder profile dataset I could find online. I'm not kidding, you can't find anything larger on YouTube, Google, anywhere. And now I have access to it, which would be great if I was a data scientist, but I am not. So when Christian reached out to me, I low-key had a panic attack until I remembered I have a really smart friend named Brad. Brad imported the raw data into a SQL database, used that to trim the data, and built some views to format the data. So with the raw data from Christian's site, Brad's ability to crunch the numbers, and my charisma, we discovered some groundbreaking discoveries. With this dataset, I was able to break down everything from the app's usage to match rates, swipe activity, and more. But let's start with something simple. Who actually opens the app more, men or women? We found that on average, men open the app around 5,646 times, while women open it 3,779 times. That's a pretty big gap. But here's where things get interesting. Those are average numbers, which can be skewed by a small amount of really extreme users. So we also looked at the median, which is a better way to find a middle ground. This time the numbers were much lower and much closer together, 2,224 for men and 1,931 for women. That means while some men are using the app way more, the typical experience between men and women is actually more similar than the average suggests. We also looked at seasonality, like what time of the year men and women are using Tinder the most. And this is super interesting. Men on average open and use Tinder way more during May, June, and July than any other months. Women, on the other hand, do have an increase around that time of year during April, May, and June, but nothing that's significant. So takeaway-wise, for some reason, men use Tinder way more during the summer, while women seemingly use Tinder about the same all year, but just have a slight increase during the summer. Is this because of summer flings, summer vacation? Who knows? Next, we looked at messages sent and received. Just like app opens, these numbers varied a lot depending on if we looked at the average or the median. So who sends the most messages? Believe it or not, women. On average, women sent 1,709 messages, while men sent just 1,404. The median tells the same story, but with lower numbers. 760 for women and 371 for men. No matter how you slice it, women are sending more messages than men. When it comes to messages received, the gap gets even bigger. Women received an average of 2,072 messages, while men got 1,224. The median numbers are even more telling. 1,013 for women versus just 321 for men. The takeaway? Well, while men spend more time on Tinder opening the app, women aren't just sending more messages, they're receiving more messages as well. However, since this data includes all messages sent and received, it's harder to pinpoint who's initiating conversations. And then of course we had to look at the meat and potatoes, the average swipes, likes, passes, and of course, match rates. To start, the difference in swiping behavior between men and women is staggering. On average, men swiped a jaw-dropping 16,367 times, while women swiped only 2,283 times. Looking at the median, which remember means the middle value rather than the average, men swiped right 5,096 times, while women only swiped 989 times. When looking at passes, the time users swiped left and rejected a profile. On average, women passed on 41,170 profiles, while men passed on 28,086. The median, women had 19,553 passes, while men had 10,051. Why is this interesting? Because it highlights just how differently men and women approach Tinder. Men seemingly are casting a wider net, while women seemingly are being a little bit more selective. Now let's talk about match rates, or the percentage of right swipes that actually turn into matches. On average, women had a 30.17% match rate, while men sat at just 2.63%. The median numbers tell a similar story, 32.96 for women and only 2.14% for men. So what does this mean? Well, women are roughly 11 to 15 times more likely to match with someone compared to men on Tinder. And then my favorite section, which I really wanted to look at, super likes. For those of you who don't know, super likes are a special feature that Tinder has. You get a couple free ones, but most people pay for them. Essentially, they advertise super likes as a way to engage quicker with potential matches. And this is kind of mind-blowing. We found that on average, women used only 4.8 super likes, while men used 93.7. When we looked at the median, men averaged just 1 super like, and women averaged 0. This shows that most people aren't using super likes at all, just a select few. But that begs the question, do they actually work? Do super likes equal more matches? Well, we looked into that. For this, we looked at the top 1% and top 10% of users who sent the most super likes. Keep in mind, all of these were men. Interestingly, the top 10% of super likers sent an average of 705 super likes and had a match rate of 2.29%. That's slightly better than the median man, but worse than the average. The top 1% of super likers, however, went all out, sending an astounding 3,248 super likes. but their match rate was only 1.94%, meaning they actually did worse than both a median and average man. So what does this tell us? Well, first off, I'd say that spamming super likes isn't a game changer. It really, in fact, might even have the opposite effect. Instead of increasing match rates, excessive super liking appears to be correlated with worse results. There may be a few reasons for this. One could be that people who heavily rely on super likes already just have a bad match rate. Or two, it might just come off as desperate or overeager, which might turn people off. Whatever the case, it seems that super liking really isn't a key to success on Tinder. Pretty insane, right? Now, it's important to note with all this information and these takeaways to remember, this is just one data set for Tinder. While Tinder is the most popular dating app experiences likely differ. It's also important to note that there's likely a difference between every single user on Tinder and users that requested their own data from Tinder and wanted to analyze it on a site like Swipe Stats. So while this isn't a perfect representation of every dating app experience for every single person, it's still significantly better than anything else out there. So where does this leave us? What can we learn from this data, the surveys, the patterns of swipes and messages? What does this tell us about men, women, dating apps, loneliness, and where society stands today? Well, for starters, what happens on these platforms isn't some grand reflection of human nature. It's not proof that dating is hopeless or that modern romance is doomed. It's a business model, and like any effective business, these apps have found a way to keep you engaged, frustrated, and most importantly, paying. And the crazy part about all this is the worse the experience gets, the more we buy into the idea that we are the problem. We've even let this frustration fuel a toxic blame game, one where men and women point fingers at each other rather than the system that's trapping them both. While dating apps aren't outright telling you that women are too picky or that men aren't trying hard enough, they've created a system that I would argue pushes that narrative. A narrative where the blame for widespread dissatisfaction falls on users and their expectations rather than the app's design. The companies behind these platforms have made their stance clear. The solution isn't transparency, it isn't sharing data, and it certainly isn't addressing the flaws in the system. Instead, they focus on doubling down, adding more tech, and pushing things like AI-driven dating as the future. They're fueling the loneliness epidemic, not solving it. Now, I won't pretend that I have all the answers, but I do know this: the first step to fixing any problem is admitting that there is one. So maybe the modern dating crisis isn't about men versus women. Maybe it's about all of us versus the industry that profits off our loneliness. And yet, despite all this, we keep coming back. Because what if the next swipe is the swipe? What if the next swipe is the one? That's the illusion. That's the hook. And that's why these companies will never, ever let you see the full picture. Because that moment you do, you might finally realize you were never meant to win at all. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you learned something today. Special thanks to my Patreon supporters, Christian, Brad, and all my incredible friends and family members. I love you all. Thank you guys so much. See you next time. Dating apps, more like dating craps, am I right?